I want to welcome everybody here to our webinar today, where we're going to talk to you about cybersecurity assessments. We are scheduled to go for about 45 minutes, but that also leaves us, we do have 10 minutes of time for Q&A factored in there, so we might end up ending a bit early. First off, I'll introduce myself. So I am kind of the moderator here today. My name is Alyssa Parenteau. I'm a senior cybersecurity analyst and advisor at Field Effect. I've been playing this cybersecurity game for a bit over 20 years now. Most of the time was at CSE, which is the Canadian NSA. I got to work both offense and defense there, which was really great. In my current role here at Field Effect, I help to enable organizations to make good decisions regarding their cybersecurity through content and education pieces like this webinar today. I got to work with Mike actually both at CSE and in a previous position here at Field Effect, where along with other colleagues, we got to create and deliver our professional services, of which we're talking about the assessments today. Now, Mike is a very smart man, and I've known him a very long time, so he has opted to introduce himself.
Thanks, Alyssa. Hi, my name's Mike Russell. I've been working in cybersecurity for about 20 years now. I spent most of the last 20 years working for the Canadian federal government. Moved over to Field Effect in late 2022, and I've been working on our professional services team ever since. I'm kind of a cybersecurity generalist at this point. My expertise is in math and computer science, but I've had a number of roles over the years in cybersecurity on both offense and defense. So I know a little bit about a lot of cybersecurity. So hopefully you'll appreciate today's presentation, and thanks for joining us. Alyssa?
Awesome. All right, let's get into the agenda. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about what is good cybersecurity. Any discussion about a cybersecurity assessment, it needs to lay the foundation of what good cybersecurity looks like. Then we're going to get a bit into why to get assessed, what to expect from an assessment, give you guys a good idea of what the product should be, what the process should be. And then we're going to give you a little bit of information about Field Effect's cybersecurity assessments, because we do have a few of those products in our portfolio. All right, without further ado, Mike, can you get into this for us? What does good cybersecurity look like?
Sure, Alyssa. We put 6 attributes up on your screen. For those who know textbook cybersecurity: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is about keeping things private that you want to keep private. Integrity is about making sure that if you have a record, it can't be changed without somebody changing it, some kind of a logging system that shows that it's changed, so that only changes that should happen can happen. And availability is about making sure that whatever service you're offering is available to the extent you want it available to your clients. We also throw 3 additional attributes up there that are very much related to the top 3: privacy, safety, and reliability. Privacy, the concept is information you hold should not be released outside of your intended releases for it. Safety, this comes up a lot with internet connected systems. You don't want, say, a compromise in a chemical plant to result in real world harm to human beings or the environment or other. Lastly, reliability. This comes up a lot in, say, the electricity sector. You want to ensure that you have continuous power available to people, or if you have outages, you know when they'll be so you can work around them. So there's slight variance on the first 3, but when you consider all 3 together, you have the 6 main attributes of what a good cybersecurity program should have. And that good program then identifies risk to these 6 attributes. You implement controls to reduce these risks to a point where you're comfortable managing what's left in terms of risk. And then you allow your organization's management to accept the residual risk you have from the controls and the risks that you've identified. That's what makes a good cybersecurity program at its core. It's an exercise in risk management specifically tailored for cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Mike. It's about, when you strip everything else down, right, it's really about continuous risk management. And the one thing we should note with that is Mike did make sure to highlight that, it should also allow an organization's management to accept the residual risk. And there's always going to be residual risk. I have seen some vendors talk about how they can get your risk down to 0, and that should just be a red flag. There's no such thing as being able to get your risk down to completely 0. It's just technology changes too quickly. There's too many moving pieces. We do our best to shrink it as much as we can, but 0 is just not a thing that's possible. All right. So we talked about what is good security using the CIA PSR framework. So, Mike, could we get into a suggested approach? Because there's what's on paper, right? Like there's the framework, what's on paper, but how do we actually do the thing?
Yeah, this is one of the things that I've learned in my career is probably the hardest thing to do. Sure, you just have to identify every risk you have and then implement every control that's out there that could possibly reduce the risk. And you go about doing this for a while until you realize that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of controls that you actually need to implement. And it becomes a never ending exercise in what do I need to do today? Frankly, it doesn't work in practice. Even if you were to follow a framework, frameworks tend to have hundreds of controls, especially for our target audience today, the small and medium business space. That's just too expensive to do. You can't implement military grade security in the private sector, especially in small private sector organizations, because it's just too costly. So I've seen an approach that works really, really well, and it's an approach that we take here at Field Effect. Your first step, invest in excellent monitoring to offset any weaker aspects of your cybersecurity program. The whole concept is make sure that someone can't stay in your network and can't get in and stick around for very long while you go about improving your other controls. Step 2, assess your program. Get help if you need help to do this. If you have expertise in-house, great. If you don't, look outside for cybersecurity experts who can give you a prioritized action plan, which is number 3, towards better cybersecurity. The whole idea here is invest wisely so that your return on investment's always as high as possible. If you can't do everything, do the things that matter most and that you'll get the most benefit from, and do those first or near the top of your list. Don't let those slide down where you're implementing suboptimal controls early on, so that you end up with a lot of controls, but maybe not great coverage of what's most going to impact your organization. Step 4, once you have an action plan, implement it and measure your improvement. If you want to demonstrate, especially to a board of directors, that you need more money for cybersecurity, a good action plan that demonstrates good return on investment and measures that return on investment, when you go back to ask the second time or the third time or subsequent times for more money for cybersecurity, you have a track record, you have an action plan that makes sense and has historically made sense, and that's much more likely to get you green lit for initiatives, because there'll be trust that you're implementing the most effective things for the organization and not just what's interesting today.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the part about step 4 there is the measuring of improvement and even just the reviewing, right? That whole process is something we often see missing, right? We often see missing in people's current approaches. One thing I also wanted to touch upon, Mike, you were talking about the monitoring, and what that comes down to. You were mentioning about being able to monitor the systems and make sure that you can catch something while you're also improving, because the idea there is that monitoring also helps us with containment, right? So even if something does happen, we're able to minimize the impact of an event or an incident.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Your whole goal is to reduce dwell time and catch them before the impact is more notable. Unfortunately, it's not a matter of if, it's unfortunately a matter of when. And I don't mean that as a fear tactic. It's just if you assume that it's coming and you know that they'll get past your defenses because your defenses aren't perfect, but you're able to catch them quickly, the compromise doesn't have much of an impact to your organization. You remediate it quickly and you move and wait till the next time it happens. That means you can have weaker cybersecurity controls within your program, but because your monitoring catches things relatively effectively. If you've got good monitoring in place, you can root it out before it does significant damage, and then you can reprioritize whatever controls it takes to keep that type of threat from coming back and getting in the first place, and then just iterate over time with that approach. And while you improve your cybersecurity program in the background, you have relatively good frontline defenses that prevent you from being seriously compromised while you build your program further.
One of the things that we wanted to answer today for everybody was the idea of why get an assessment. Different companies have different needs and might be at different points in their cybersecurity journey. So, Mike, I was hoping you could walk us through at a high level why an organization might need an assessment as part of their process.
Sure. Some companies have cybersecurity departments built into their IT department. Tend to be much larger companies because to have a department, you need a lot of cybersecurity resources, not just one or two. Oftentimes, smaller organizations just don't have that expertise, and it's hard to come by. It's expensive, and there's not a lot of resources who really are experts in cybersecurity out there compared to the amount of demand there is from industry. So getting assessed from an external organization can be very beneficial if you don't know what you need to invest in, or you don't know what you need to invest in next in terms of priority. An expert should be someone who's been through enough or has enough experience in cybersecurity to be able to decide what makes sense to do next and be able to give you a prioritized list of what you should be doing. The advantage to it also is someone external doesn't have the same buy-in to all of what you've done historically, so they can independently assess the merit of certain types of controls or the gaps in certain types of controls that someone internal might be more resistant to do so. So the second opinion concept is really important. You also want to have an improvement plan for cybersecurity. An assessment's what gives you that. And if you do it internally or if you outsource an assessment, it'll give you a plan forward to improve your cybersecurity, because there's always, unfortunately, no matter how good you are, opportunities for improvement. Finally, if you're looking down the road to get certifications in cybersecurity, an assessment of your program, a gap assessment, is very, very useful because it can put you on the path towards certification. When you want to be certified, you must meet all the controls in a framework, not just some of them. If you do a gap assessment for certification and they give you 100 deficiencies, you have no concept of what you should tackle first. If you want to be certified, you need to tackle all. If you're looking for certification down the road, you kind of need a roadmap towards the point where you're ready to be certified. So an assessment can be very valuable for that, to get your program to the point where it's ready to be certified, because your gap assessment is going to be very small when you go for formal certification.
Yeah, I did want to point out the second point here about getting a second opinion. We do see times too where we've had clients that require like an unbiased third-party assessment, depending on if it's an issue with cyber insurance or something else. So that is something to keep in mind, or even just a due diligence proof point. If we have some clients that buy smaller companies and have a due diligence process, and sometimes it's nice to be able to show that you've had an unbiased third-party assessment and that it's not just you checking on yourself. All right, so we've gotten to why to get an assessment. Now let's get a bit into what to expect from an assessment.
The first thing you want out of an assessment is an analysis of your entire cybersecurity program. If you were to do something like a certification, it tends to be a subset of your program. But if you're looking to improve your overall program, you want whoever's assessing it to look at the entirety of your program. Coming out of it, you want concise, easy to understand analysis. Everyone's had to read a 200-page report on how something needs to be improved. It's not terribly helpful if there isn't a massive simplification to it. So you want simple, concise, easy to understand analysis and easy to understand recommendations written in relatively plain language, because it's far too easy to fall into the jargon-styled reports where you get very detailed analysis, but not a lot of ability to action it. But you want to have information within your assessment that can help you justify and validate your investments. Cybersecurity for most organizations is not a profit center. It's a cost center. You're doing it because you need to protect your organization, not because it's a differentiator for your business. You have to do it, and it is an expense. So you want to make sure that anytime you need to spend, you have a good justification for why you're spending it. And when you do spend the money, you want to be able to validate that the expenditure was effective at what you were trying to mitigate. So in this case, risk. Did you reduce risk by an expenditure? Yes, no. If you have the ability to say yes repeatedly, you'll find that when you do asks from the senior management team of your organizations, and you have a track record to say we invest wisely in cybersecurity and our investments pay off in terms of reduced risk, it's a much easier sell to continue to improve your program. Whereas if you spend money and don't really have much to show for it in terms of deliverables or outcomes, it's a lot harder to go back and ask for money for more controls. And unfortunately, in cybersecurity, it feels like there are always more controls to implement to reduce your risk further. So having a track record over time of successfully implementing bits and pieces of a cybersecurity program to reduce overall risk, and a way to measure that means that the assessment that getting an assessment has led you to the point where you can effectively invest year over year and have an improving cybersecurity program for as long as you want to. Last thing you want from assessment, support to simplify the implementation. It's very easy to give a suggestion or a recommendation on what you want to do. You should have better multi-factor authentication. It's much more challenging when you get into the implementation details to make sure that you're implementing it correctly and across the board for your network. There's lots of little considerations to take into effect as you do that. And you want your assessment to reflect that so that the recommendations you have are something that you can actually carry forward into implementation and have support for that implementation.
I should note that what we're highlighting here is kind of the ideal of what you should be getting out of your assessment, because what Mike was just speaking to, we have seen sometimes where we have clients who come to us and they've had an assessment, but it's not prioritized, and then we've helped them work through. Mike actually, in particular, help them work on a roadmap, right, to help with the prioritization and the implementation and have that support. Some of the controls that you're asked to implement aren't simple. And we understand that. And at Field Effect, we do focus on small to medium enterprise, and we understand that there might be some extra support needed. I'm just mentioning that because if you are looking around at an assessment, just keep in mind that not all vendors might offer this. So it's something that you might want to be thinking about depending on where your level of maturity is or how much in-house support you have. Vice require the external. We've talked a bit generally about assessments, and now we're going to pull back the curtain a bit on how Field Effect architects and conduct cybersecurity assessments. Different vendors will have, different ways of doing things and different outputs, but we thought it would be nice to give you guys kind of a walkthrough and an idea of what you could expect from us. It's one way of doing things, and give you a better idea of the whole process and the why, because we can speak to our products. So first up, we're going to talk a bit about the foundation of these services, which are the Field Effect cybersecurity controls. I feel like before kind of getting into it, we should define what a cybersecurity control is. In its simplest form, you can just think of it as actions that we're taking to control for a specific risk. So it's those risk mitigation actions that we were talking about earlier. Mike, do you want to get into a bit more detail?
Internally, we know that there are many frameworks for cybersecurity, and there are tons and tons of catalogs of controls. We condense them into what we think are the most important things to do. We divided it up into 18 categories, which you can see very faintly on the screen. And then within each of those, you can see there's between 10 and 25 controls per group or per topic, if you prefer, within these. And we actually prioritize them further into critical things that you must have. They're the highest priority. They have the highest return on investment for implementing. And we want you to consider doing these first. We then go into the orange for core, what we call core. These are must-haves, medium priority items. You do these second. You still have to do them, but you can do them second. You implement the red and the orange together, and you get the biggest impact in terms of risk reduction that you can get. We then get into advanced and resilient, which we have in a lighter gray. Advanced or should haves, they're lower priority. You do these once you have your critical and core controls in place, your highest and medium priority controls. And then resilient, these are nice to haves, they're lower priority. These are about optimizing your cybersecurity protections. They're things you want to do if you're in a more leadership role in cybersecurity. But an organization that's just looking to reduce its risk against the most common types of threats, that's not really the space you want to be in. So we have a number of controls, roughly half of them, if you add them up across all the categories, that fill these the third and fourth category of should have and nice to have. They are important, and they're very important if you're looking to get certified in many cases, because many of these resilient controls are part of certification frameworks. But they're not really necessary for organizations just looking to establish a solid cybersecurity program. And with these 4 differentiators, we then have a way to roadmap organizations from what they should do immediately to what they should do in time to what they should consider doing, and to things that they can do to optimize their program once they have a more mature program down the road.
Could you give us an example, Mike, of like within the same kind of theme or control group of what a critical control would look like, a core, advanced, resilient, like an example of that buildup?
Absolutely. There is one of the categories called endpoint and cloud protection. It's, I think, the 5th from the right in the graph that you're looking at right now. A critical control from this category, or from this topic, would be have a managed detection and response capability of some form in place. You need good monitoring. Having an MDR solution in your network is going to be the critical control for this. A related core control would be ensuring that you have either a 24-hour security operations center, a SOC, or that you outsource SOC type functions to, say, a managed security services provider. This gives you 24-hour monitoring of the solution you put in place when you set up your critical control, the MDR system. In terms of an advanced control, it would be having a documented service level that you need to meet for alerts coming out of your security solutions, including your MDR. So the purpose here is that you have policy in place to say that not only do you have a solution and not only do you monitor it, but you'll catch alerts and investigate any alerts that come up within a certain period of time. And then you can manage and monitor and manage your service level to make sure that you're actually meeting the expectations of your program. At a more resilient level, at the highest level, you'd be doing monthly audits to ensure that your security solutions actually cover all of your assets. So that not only do you have a program in place, but you're making sure that it runs on everything that it should run and that it's running effectively and efficiently. So you can see the progression from a must-have, having a monitoring solution in place, to resilient, optimizing that solution and making sure that it's constantly what the organization needs. And each of those things is a different control that you would have, but it contributes to your overall cybersecurity maturity and your overall cybersecurity program.
Thanks. And it actually, speaking of cybersecurity program maturity, that segues nicely into our next slide. So what you're just talking about, Mike, about how we have our critical, our core, our advanced and resilient, we know that different organizations will require different levels of cybersecurity maturity. Not everyone will need to kind of climb the steps of this ladder here, or these stairs, all the way up to certification. Understanding where you're starting from and where you want to eventually be is kind of part of this assessment process, right, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the bottom of the ladder, you start with organizations that have no cybersecurity program. They haven't had a need to, or haven't had an interest in investing in ones. They don't really have much in the way of controls. Moving on, you get an ad hoc program where some controls are in place, but there's not a lot of programmatics around it. You go from an ad hoc program to a repeatable program where the programmatics start to come in. You have policies, you have processes and procedures that people follow, and there's not a lot done as one-offs. You have a program that operates. You move to a program that's assessed. This is a program where you've actually started to look for where your gaps are so that you have repeatable processes across your entire program and your entire risk space. And at the top of the stack, you get a certified program where you've actually gone and had external assessors determine that you meet a cybersecurity framework. So again, not every organization needs to be certified. Organizations that are under regulation for cybersecurity tend to be the ones where you see certifications or service providers in those sectors. But there are other sectors. So an example of that would be, say, the energy sector, energy producers, or the defense industrial base. You tend to see a lot of certification-driven cybersecurity in those sectors. Other sectors, like, say, the retail sector, a repeatable cybersecurity program may be sufficient in some cases, especially for small and medium organizations where the threats aren't as challenging to deal with, that don't require a more advanced cybersecurity program. Some small organizations just have ad hoc programs because they don't have a large internet presence, but they have an IT system. So they have some cybersecurity, but they're looking or hoping to build more to get to a more repeatable program. And this continuum can be expressed in many ways. We've just chosen to do it this way because it's particularly applicable to the small and medium business environment.
Yeah, so once again, good segue. It's almost like we practiced this, Mike. Good segue into Field Effect does have two cybersecurity assessment products. And the first one is kind of, we're looking at the initial space on those stepping stones, right, Mike?
Yeah, so we call it the foundational cybersecurity assessment. We're really focusing on those must-have and need-to-have solutions, those high priority and medium priority controls that your organization most likely wants to have in place to have a robust cybersecurity program against most of the common threats. This type of assessment is typically for organizations that are looking to start a formal cybersecurity program or improve on their existing cybersecurity fundamentals, and it prioritizes cybersecurity activities that will matter most against common types of threats. So from the client experience, you'd complete a survey with us. It takes between 1 and 2 hours. You would get back an action plan that would outline your high and medium priority items, and they'd be itemized in terms of how we think it would be best to implement them based on return on investment. We would discuss this plan with our clients. We'd also follow up with them afterwards about a month afterwards to see how the implementation's going, to make sure that we're not just firing recommendations and forgetting about you. That's not our intent at all. We really do want to see people improve their cybersecurity. If we give an assessment with with an action plan or a roadmap, as we'll see in the next service, the whole goal is to help you improve your cybersecurity in an effective and efficient way. Lastly, if you're a new client to us, we include a trial of our Field Effect MDR. Our Covalence MDR, pardon me. This is our flagship product as an organization. We believe very strongly in it. We include it in our professional services. You're not obligated to take it, but if you'd like to do a trial while you're doing an assessment with us, that's great. We'll use data we see from that to augment what we get through your survey. And if you don't choose to do it, we'll just base our assessment on the survey you complete with us. On the right of the screen, you see two pages of the reporting, of our sample reporting. First page is a summary of findings where we outline strengths, minor gaps, and significant gaps. And then we show it in another format based on the topic from cybersecurity that we showed earlier related to the controls. You can see in this example, there's a fair bit of green, a little bit of red, and more orange. What this says is that the organization here has a number of cybersecurity controls in place, but they have some gaps in the critical space and a number of gaps in the medium priority space. So an action plan from this would be relatively extensive. It would have in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 recommendations, and it would probably take a couple of years to implement all of them. But again, they're prioritized so you can start at the top of the list and work your way down as your budget and implementation capacity allow. The second page shows you a little bit about what our reporting looks like per topic. We explain why a topic's important to your cybersecurity program and what it does to help improve your program. We walk through what your strengths are and we list what we see as gaps. We then provide recommendations in the action plan that would be accompanying this report. So you get an assessment of your program based on what you need to do first and what you need to do most importantly. And it kind of reduces the noise you'd have from a full assessment where you'd have potentially hundreds of recommendations. This tends to limit it to those organizations just to let them focus on what matters most first.
That's great. We're going to get into the second type of assessment we have. But I do want to mention one of the reasons why we have the foundational or the smaller version is we did find that, a lot of companies who are at the beginning of their cybersecurity journey, if they were to get a full assessment that was trying to get you all the way to some sort of certification, it really would feel a lot like trying to take information from a fire hose, right? It would be a lot of information and it would be very overwhelming. So we felt the need to have the two separate products so that we could best serve our clients. Mike, do you want to get into the advanced?
Yeah. So like Alyssa mentioned, the foundational assessment's really for organizations that have less mature programs, and there's nothing wrong with that. Getting an assessment to improve your program is a great step forward in cybersecurity. More advanced organizations that already have a program and tend to have staff can absorb more extensive recommendations. And at this point, it's as much a gap assessment as anything. So if you're looking to mature an existing program where you have a program, but you're not quite sure where you may have some gaps, or if you need a longer-term roadmap to an effective cybersecurity program, or a third case, you're looking to get certified down the road and you want to know what you should be implementing to get there. The advanced cybersecurity assessment will give you a roadmap to a robust and resilient cybersecurity program. In this particular situation, clients complete an extensive survey. It's roughly twice as long as that of the foundational cybersecurity assessment. So it's between 2 and 3 hours to complete. You get a roadmap. And what's the difference between an action plan and a roadmap? An action plan tells you should do this. A roadmap says you should do this in this phase, and that in a second phase, and more things in a third phase, and even more in a fourth. And depending on the number of recommendations, we will increase the number of phases. It may be that an organization tackles a phase in a year, in which case the roadmap is a multi-year plan. Or it may be the case that the organization wants to accelerate their program development and they schedule phases as parts of a year. It really depends on the extensiveness of the recommendations and the willingness of the organization to implement the gaps. So this roadmap gives you a much more detailed plan over a multi-year period for what you should do in cybersecurity, whereas the foundational assessment is, here's what you should tackle first. So major difference is just the scope of the assessments. You still get the same experienced cybersecurity analyst involved with you to both give you a debrief on your findings and to follow up with you a month or so after the assessment to make sure you're on the right track for implementation and to address any questions or concerns you might have. And if you're not an existing Field Effect Covalence MDR client, there is a trial available to you if you'd like to try out our product. If not, that's fine too. We base all of our assessment on the survey. On the right of the screen, again, you see a little bit of the assessment. There are similarities between the two assessments because they're derived off the same controls, but because there are so many more controls within the advanced cybersecurity assessment, we actually break it out by level. And in the first diagram that you see under maturity level assessment, we assign you a tier, or we assess you as having a tier. This is basically where we see your program from ad hoc through resilient, and we have labels that describe each of those levels that kind of give a clear understanding of where you are in your cybersecurity journey, or where we see you in your cybersecurity journey. The donut graphs you see, those are the green and gray graphs in the middle of the image. Each of those is for, well, one's for critical, and then the next for core, the other for advanced and resilient. And in this case, you see an the organization, well, it's just a test organization, but with sample data, but you see graphs that have roughly the same number of controls from each group implemented, or from each level implemented. This is not uncommon for a program that lacks focus. What you'd really like to see is a green critical and an almost entirely green core, and then gaps in the last two. But in practice, what we often see is relatively even distribution between those controls that are most critical and those that are more optimizing other controls that could wait while you implement things that are more critical. The assessment will get you focused on filling those first two boxes with green so that you see two green circles, and then address the long-term needs via the advanced and resilience controls for your program. The other page, you see the introduction to each of the themes within the assessment. We break the topics up into themes to make it a little easier to digest. And you see the graph here of an organization that has about half the controls implemented, slightly less than half, but there are significant critical and core gaps that remain to address, as well as a number of advanced and resilient items in gray. Again, this is very typical of an organization that hasn't had a lot of focus in cybersecurity and has implemented things in a kind of a piecemeal approach over time, which often happens when there's just not a lot of direction to the program.
That's awesome. So we have talked a bit to the next slide, actually. We read ahead about, what assessment is right for you. I think that you might have covered this in the conversations about what the foundational assessment and advanced assessment is. Was there anything you would want to add here, Mike?
No, just the clarity that if you're looking to establish or mature a relatively basic program, stick to an easier assessment. You're going to get a lot of recommendations because there's just so much you can do in cybersecurity. If you have a strong program, what you think is a strong program, and you're looking to get assessed, a much more in-depth assessment will be better for you because you'll get a thorough assessment of your entire program. And because you already have a number of controls in place, you'll get recommendations, probably the same number of recommendations you would from a more basic assessment because you have a program in place, but you'll get the assessment, the more advanced and resilient controls won't overwhelm you the way they might if you were a smaller organization just looking to invest in your program.
Just in summary, what we talked about today, if you break it all down, cybersecurity is about continuous risk management. Good cybersecurity is a structured approach to this risk management, and assessments are a great tool to help build this structure and ultimately provide you with a plan for organized and prioritized improvement. As we just went through, Field Effect does have a few cybersecurity assessment services, so please reach out if you want more information. And as mentioned in the beginning with the housekeeping notes, everyone who signed up for this webinar today will be offered in a follow-up email. You'll be offered a preliminary cybersecurity assessment if you'd like to take advantage of that. So what is this? It's a free assessment product, which will give you an idea of the look and feel of our paid products. And it's a small subset of the questions. It's intended to be a quick and easy glance at your current cybersecurity posture. Mike, would you want to add anything about the preliminary cybersecurity assessment?
The main purpose is to show you what we at Field Effect can do for you. organizations that don't have a lot of cybersecurity can benefit greatly from it, because you can just implement our findings and end up with a good program. And you can compare it to what other organizations say to see that we do have expertise and we do know what we're doing in cybersecurity. And we're interested in what's best for your organization. So we tend to prioritize things based on the impact it'll have on you. We think that approach is relatively unique. We're happy to show you what we can do via preliminary assessment. And if you find that those are useful and you want a more in-depth assessment, be it a foundational or an advanced cybersecurity assessment, you can follow up with us then at your own leisure. Our goal today is really to help you improve your cybersecurity program, whether it be via an assessment or otherwise. Hopefully you got something useful to that extent out of our discussion today, and we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. I do see we have a couple of questions that I would actually like to get to. So first off, so somebody noted here, sorry if this was already mentioned, but they were wondering, what are the controls based on? I believe they mean specifically like a specific compliance framework, maybe they're thinking of here. But do you want to get into what we based all the controls on, Mike?
I have experience with the NIST SP800 series of controls, like SP800, 53, 171, and many of the other smaller families within there. So all their controls we're aware of. The NIST cybersecurity framework, we looked at their controls and included some of them. There's some commercial ones like the Center for Internet Security that produce great cybersecurity frameworks. They're licensed, however, so we don't make use of their controls directly because we do an assessment that's not related to them. There's also, in Canada, the federal government put out baseline cybersecurity controls a number of years ago. We incorporated the elements that we liked from that profile. And we also have experience with the ISO 27000 family of security controls. So we borrowed from there, as well as things we picked up over the years that are useful in cybersecurity that are important to have so that you have a good cybersecurity program that protects you optimally.
Yeah, I think it's good to note that it's also informed by some of the incident response work we do. At Field Effect, we also do incident response. We have that service. And so we're kind of on the cutting edge of seeing what the threat actors, the bad guys are actually doing to get on networks, to move around networks. So we're also able to kind of tweak and inform the assessment products based on that. So sometimes, for example, we might change the priority of something based on the fact that we're seeing it actively exploited, or we're seeing a ramp up of it. So that's helpful too. But I think in summary, it's informed by many different kind of frameworks based on, we have a lot of people with a lot of experience in this realm, and also based on some of the other in-house expertise and services that we provide. Another question we had here is that we do have an attendee that's a new Covalence customer, and they're wondering if they would benefit from a cybersecurity assessment.
It really depends on your intent for cybersecurity. If you're comfortable with being a new Covalence customer and benefiting from our Covalence service, and that's where you want to be in terms of your progression through the cybersecurity roadmap we showed earlier, then maybe an assessment isn't right for you. If you are looking to mature your program, being it a new program or a more advanced program where you've just added Covalence into your cybersecurity stack, an assessment will help prioritize what you could do next. If you're looking to do investment in cybersecurity, an assessment is something we'd recommend for you because it'll give you an outside opinion on what you should do and what you should do first. Again, if you're just comfortable with being a new client, however, and you're looking to settle into that, maybe an assessment isn't quite the thing you should be looking at first. But if you're looking to improve your program and to improve it over a period of time, then yeah, an assessment would be quite useful. Again, the depth of the assessment depends on the maturity of your program. A foundational assessment for a less mature program, and an advanced cybersecurity assessment for a program that's already relatively solid, has all the policies and procedures in place, and you're looking for more of a gap analysis. Does that make sense, Alyssa?
Yeah, no, I like that. I would just add that, technology is great and it's a great tool. And having MDR in place is probably the most important thing that you can do for your organization. But technology can't tell us everything about your cybersecurity maturity, right? Like technology can't tell us how good your incident response planning is, or how, if you have a policy in place about acceptable use or policies or procedures in place related to password creation and management. We can kind of only get that information from some sort of assessment. So what you're going to get from the assessment is a more holistic understanding of your overall cybersecurity posture. But Mike has a good point. You might want to settle in a bit first. But if you're looking to improve, we would always recommend an assessment, because you're just going to get a larger aperture and a larger idea of your overall cybersecurity. All right. Let's see. Last but not least, this is a compliance one, so Mike's going to like it. If I know I need CMMC compliance, do you see any benefit in doing a general cybersecurity assessment before attempting that certification?
All right. CMMC is an interesting case. If you've never had an assessment of your cybersecurity program and you need a gap assessment for that, gap assessments for CMMC, they're pretty pricey at the moment, just because there's a real supply and demand challenge there. If you're wanting to know if you'll be ready to get certified and just do a certification, an overall assessment of your program will give you an idea of whether you're going to be in a good position or not. If you have tremendous gaps in your program, that's almost assuredly going to translate to large gaps when you go to get certified for CMMC. If you have a mature program already, you may be best served just by a gap analysis for CMMC. It really depends on your program. It's one of those questions that depends on the specifics. But generally, if you have an immature program, an overall assessment of your program is probably something you want to do first, because you have significant things to do, and the prioritization you'll get will help you do the most important things first. If you have a more mature program, you will have some gaps, because you will inevitably do when you're certified, and going directly after those gaps may be the most efficient path for you. So it really does depend. That's about the best way to put it. It depends on your particular circumstances and how mature your existing program is. A very mature program, probably you just want to focus on certification. A less mature program, probably an assessment.
Yeah, no, that's a really good summary. And I just want to thank everybody for spending this time with us today, and remind you again that you will be getting a follow-up email where you'll get a copy of this deck. You get the slides, you'll get a link to the recording, and you will get additional details about the preliminary assessment if you want to take advantage of that. Thank you very much, Mike, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone else. Have a great rest of your day.